I read today that a supermarket in the UK has 28 different types of tomato ketchup. Unbelievably, 224 different types of air freshener. There are 60, apparently, energy suppliers in the UK providing the same gas and the same electricity, or mostly, down existing pipes and cables. About once a year for the past 3 years, I decided to do something about my alarm clock. Well, I use my phone. It's quite simple, seems to me. I need 3 different times, on different days of the week for the places I teach. And I think I'd like a 20-minute snooze. My phone does the different days, but it doesn't do a 20-minute snooze. It's either 15 or 30. 30's too long. 15, I feel I'd like a bit more. So, I looked online, the UK supplier, and a shop. I think I must have got to about 30 to 40 different alarm clocks. I couldn't figure out if any of them did different days, didn't seem like it. They didn't seem to have a variable snooze from what I could see. Because there were so many, the information was quite short on each page, 5 on each page maybe. But then I click on it, and you know what's happened? The same thing that happened the year before that, and the year before that. I just shut the page down and thought I'll stay with my phone. So, a microphone, I would say, is much more personal than an alarm clock, or your gas, or your air fresheners, perhaps, or perhaps your ketchup. What are you to do? I try to shed some light on how I think you might proceed based on quite a few mics now, and using them in some detail with students and myself. It's not an easy task, so take this for what it is. First thing I think you should consider is how much of your voice do you want or need to hear? Do you need the detail? Do you need the frequency extremes? Put that to one side for the minute because it relates to what comes next or later. Another thing to consider is, does your particular voice need any help? For most songs, do you need a bit of help in the low end? Do you need a bit of help higher up? Do you need a bit of help being able to cut? Have a little look at that. See if you can start to build a picture of what you're after. Bear in mind, some of these things can be done with technique, but not all. Are you quite breathy and delicate? Some people might say weak, but weak voices can sound great, providing they're loud enough and with the detail I've noticed, particularly on recordings and even live, but you have to turn the volume up, so that's an issue for later. So consider your own voice, what you might do with technique, and when you're done with that, what's the truth of what's left? The next thing I think you should consider, I think you might consider, forgive me, is what style of music. Does your voice generally sit within the music, as in some loud rock, in which case you might not hear subtleties anyway. So consider the type of music you do. this is probably an important one. Is the beauty of your voice artistically important? Or is it basic intelligibility that you need? Maybe have a think about that. Going to go through some styles of music, which is a bit ridiculous because they all overlap and interchange and everything, but pop. Well, pop covers nearly everything, but pop. So many styles, and often they have effects, and it seems to me that absolute clarity is not usually a main aim. Okay, we're talking live here, so if you're doing covers bands, doing pop things, people are going to be singing along, they know, it might be nice for you, but do they really need the beauty of your voice? You're singing different artists' songs anyway. Or is them just being able to hear you actually the main thing? So that's pop, whatever that is. Then I've got country, folk, jazz, classical, musical theatre. I know they cover broad genres, but styles of music. But with these, it seems to me that generally the voice is forward in the mix. And intelligibility is important. They're often telling stories. And the other styles rock it as well, but if you know what I'm saying, that's a major thing. And often the musical backing is sympathetic to delivering that, depending on the musicians. Whoops. But hopefully that's the idea. Rock, in my experience, and I've been a bit of a rocker in my day, it seems to me the voice usually sits within the mix, within the music. So, and what might be more desirable there is the projection of the presence frequencies. And that bit gets through and people can hear it amongst the guitars and the rest of it. It's just enough for something to poke through. I doubt you're going to hear, because the voice would have to be so loud it just wouldn't sound like rock. The voice would be so far in front of the band. The rock seems to me is sitting in with the band. There are rock ballads, of course. And here's the thing. As if things weren't complex enough, you might consider having two mics. One for the rock ballad and one for the rock. Blues, soul, R&B, old school, R&B, new school, gospel. Huge variety of singing styles there. Blues is often quite edgy and raw. Usually doesn't sound pretty. Soul seems to me could be anything. Rhythm and blues, R&B, probably edgy and raw. R&B, new school, all sorts. But probably more detail, I would have thought. Gospel kind of covers everything. So, see if I can break it down a bit further then. If you're looking for a microphone for yourself, you've considered all these things that I've mentioned. Frequency response and shaping. Do you go low? If not, the low end response might not be a factor. But even female voices who want that kind of warmth down there might need a little bit of something, but probably not the very lowest. Is it that way for you or that way? Up at the top end, what does 20 kilohertz do? I don't know. Seems like my ears have left 20 kilohertz some years ago. But, I think it's kind of air and space somehow in the top of the sound. The shaping, some of them have quite a push. You'll hear it in the kind of presence thing there, some of them. If you've got a bit of a dull voice, it might help if you've got a little bit of that. If you've got a bit of a voice that's like that anyway, you might want to tame that down a bit. You might not need it. So we're just offering things for you to consider, to try and give you some, at least a start in having a little look. Polar pattern. Up until now, up until yesterday, I mostly haven't found too much difference between cardioid and supercardioid. I can hear it when I do the tests, but for practical purposes, but I'm often not pushing the limits of feedback. But yesterday, because of positioning and stuff, I was using the biodynamic V90R ribbon microphone, and I could have done with being just a little bit louder, but it started to ring, and that was cardioid, and the speaker was there, facing in a bit to try and cover the room out there, and maybe a hypercardioid would have had just that little bit more rejection there, which it sacrifices for picking up there, but there's nothing there. Well, there's a room. So maybe. If you're often pushing the limits of feedback, you're finding that's an issue, then consider the difference between cardioid and supercardioid. Also consider that if you're often pushing the limits of feedback, then the closer you bring the mic, the more signal you're going to get. So you'll be able to get louder without adjusting the gain, but you will get the proximity effect, so it's going to get bassier. So you need to maybe stir that into your mix. Take your time with all this. Consider it, because you're going to spend some money. Take your time, I suggest. Resolution, along with speed, how quickly the diaphragm stops and starts. It's a kind of detail, inner detail, particularly around those kinds of parts of the voice and so on. Do you need that? Do you like it? I can't see that it's really going to work in heavy rock. Bear in mind, you can always have two mics. But we're looking at, it's complex enough already, so we're looking at the one. So consider that maybe. Handling noise, pops and S's. So when you looked at your voice, truthfully, to yourself, are you a bit of a blusterer? Do you do a lot of that kind of thing when you're, particularly if you're excited and putting a lot of energy into it? Do you get a lot of boof, boof, boof? You could tame that at source. Hit the mic again. You could tame that at source. Are you naturally very sibilant? It tends to be more in females, I've noticed, than males. You could probably tame that as well, because it's air, but you don't want to make yourself miserable thinking about all this stuff when you're performing. So if the mic can help you a bit for your natural tendencies, you may as well have that and work on it as well. Robustness. I have many mics which are 30, 40 years old. But of course, if they weren't working, I wouldn't have them. So maybe I've just got the ones that have survived. So generally though, one, try not to drop your mic, but sometimes other people drop it for you. Yeah, other people drop it for you. But there you go. I don't know if there are any particularly fragile mics. I haven't heard anything about particularly fragile mics. But if you throw the mic around, you do a Roger Daltrey. Oops. Then that may be a concern for you. Related to that, dynamic mic versus a condenser mic. In my experience, the main differences are a certain clarity, a certain air at the top end from the condensers, but the good dynamics are good. The old school biodynamic M88, Sennheiser do one. They're quite expensive, but they're good. The dynamics are known to be tougher, though bear in mind if you're going to have a fine dynamic that reproduces these details, the stuff's got to be light and fine. So I don't know if they're going to be as tough as something made of old boots. This stands to reason, really. Dynamics is said to be tougher. I have no experience of that. All my microphones are working, dynamics and condenser. So generally my feeling is probably that a dynamic is likely to be tougher. There's another thing. With condensers, you do need phantom power. My Bose L1 Compact, which is new, don't know how long they've been around, but I bought it this year, doesn't have phantom power. So I need to take either a phantom power unit just to power the mic, or I use a TC Helicon Perform V, which I use for effects anyway. But you will need that. You will need to phantom power it. Most things these days do have it. And another thing I noticed, I did a gig a couple of years ago, and I had this was a long time ago, because I had my then new to me Neumann KMS 105, and the singer wanted to try it, and she said, it sounds lovely. But through the gig, boof, boof, everybody was jumping these noises. A bit embarrassing for me. I thought it's got to be the mic. Turns out it wasn't the mic, but it was the beer-soaked sockets on the lead-outs for the XLRs. So condensers, if there's any issue, because it's running the phantom power up the cable, if there's any issue with the contacts, you're asking for trouble. Whereas with the dynamic, you probably get away with it. There might be the tiniest bit of dropout in your voice, but you'll be able to finish the gig. But this, we had to change the mic. You couldn't go on with that. So bear that in mind. What can you do with all these mics that are available and you can't get your hands on half of them? Go to the local shop. They'll have quite a few Sures, one or two others, maybe Sennheiser, maybe not Biodynamic, maybe not the Rode, I don't know. Just so many, and each one of those manufacturers have got so many. Look at the reviews online, I guess. Try and make a bit of sense of the graphs that they give you. Might give you some idea. Here's an idea. Maybe do as I've suggested. Take your time. Maybe get the mic you've got at the moment. Put headphones on. Listen to the kind of things I've suggested and see what it sounds like, and then see if you can borrow. Maybe do this with a friend who's got a different mic. Swap with their mic. So you start to build up an idea of what's going to suit you. And if you can swap again with a third person with a different mic, at least you've got something of an idea of what these things mean and do. So you're going to have to put a little bit of work in, I would suggest. But why not? Beyond that, then I'd say maybe then buy second hand. Obviously, it's going to be a saving. And if you don't like it and you come to sell it and it's in the same condition that you bought it second hand and you're selling it second, third, fourth, second hand, we'll call it, you may not lose. You may gain a bit. You know what these things are like. You may lose a bit, but generally speaking, you're going to be probably in the same area that ballpark that when you bought it. I hope this has been it's the best I can offer, really. So I hope it's been of some use. And incidentally, it occurred to me regarding my alarm clock. I've got an old phone, which I keep as a spare in case my current one goes down, but my current one's quite old. So that one's really quite old. And so some part of me thought, why don't you just use your old phone? There's an alarm and that's the end of that. We'll see. Bonne chance. Au revoir.